The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on Chaos2Cured Podcast are the speaker's own. All discussion is based on our own experiences. We do not and cannot guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information. Chaos2Cured Podcast cannot give medical or health advice. All discussion is based upon our personal experiences and meant for general and educational purposes. This podcast is not a substitute for professional help or for diagnostic purposes for yourself or another. Chaos2Cured Podcast always encourages you to consult an appropriate professional. Chaos2Cured Podcast is here to explain our perspective of the human experience. We hope it leads to questions, learning, wisdom, and knowledge. Welcome to Chaos2Cured Podcast, where we kind of dive into the human experience and talk about things that, we feel are valuable and, come from a different angle. So Jeffrey Freed, my wonderful co-host, is here with me, and today we're going to talk about honestly, how we interact with time. It's something that isn't talked about much, and something that I feel is really vital when you talk about trying to look at how we perceive not only our world, but even if you're going into a doctor and you're struggling with whether it's depression, definitely with anxiety, and we'll get into it. But so Jeffrey, is this something you want to start with, or would you like me to kind of jump into it first?
I'd like you to jump in first.
Okay, so one of the things that people that know me understand is that I struggle with both OCD and generalized anxiety. And I shouldn't say the word struggle. I overcome it daily, but it's a constant challenge, and it's something I have to stay on top of. One of the things that has caused a lot of anxiety in my life, and something I was not aware of for the longest amount of time, was my perception of time. And I have found this to be very true for most of the individuals I work with who really do struggle with anxiety. There's always the perception of there's not enough time. And not only is that, but let's say somebody has, I'll use myself for an example. If I have to start working at, let's say 3:00 in the afternoon, so I have clients at 3, and I have to get, emails and other things taken care of earlier in the day. The entire time I'm working, since the moment I wake up, what sneaks up on me is this apprehension, this feeling that 3:00 is coming. I am fully aware that, if I wake up at 6:00, or let's say I start at 8, so I have from 8:00 till 12:00, maybe I need 30 minutes for lunch. And then from that time till 3:00, I understand that's a lot of time. But for me, it feels like it's already gone. So it's a countdown. It's like constantly being tortured by time, which causes apprehension. It adds to my anxiety. So even objectively, if I look at it and I understand, that puts pressure on me. And a lot of times I won't get stuff done. I won't get to work, which causes more anxiety. And then that kind of adds into this feeling more of pressure. And so time is a really important variable that I have found to kind of pay attention to and also let go of, which is not easy for me to do. So this was something that Jeffrey and I really didn't, go over or talk about, just like any of our shows. So Jeffrey, do you get kind of where I'm coming from? Like that whole idea?
I'll give you an example of what I take from what you said. We all hear about special athletes, really good ones, who can make things slow down during crisis parts of a game or a match. And they are the ones that excel. To them, and Tom Brady has talked about this a lot, and Michael Jordan talked about it. It's like everything is in slow motion, and they can see where they're going and what they're about to attempt. And it is once the play is done or the event has passed, time goes back to what we call normal. But they can manipulate time and either slow it down or speed it up. That's all perception. And time, if you really examine it, what it actually is, it's a linear, sequential progression that we use to measure events. It is unquestionably a linear sequential concept, left hemisphere dominant concept. And of course, for basically neurotypical linear people, time is something to be relied on, trusted, and they can't really manipulate it that much. But for the emerging population of visual, spatial, and in many ways, a lot of these people are given diagnoses such as autism or bipolar or ADHD. Time is perceived differently. Um, they don't have the ability to sequence as well as neurotypical people do. They kind of exist in events and occurrences. And a lot of the people I work with can manipulate time, or they are terrible at manipulating time. And everyone has had the experience of doing something. I don't know, it could be getting a shot at a doctor's office. For me, the big one is going to the movies and watching previews. And I'm telling you, 10 minutes can seem like 3 hours. I have no idea that 10 minutes is up. So it's a realization that time at some time, because of perception, can be just stretched, and it can be forever for 5 minutes. And then there are other times when you are immersed in something, like with a good friend or someone that you love, or an event place that you are really thrilled to be at, where time can be the opposite. 3 hours goes by in 3 minutes. Now, what I hypothesize is everyone does have this to an extent, but people that are more right-brained or more autistic or ADD or sometimes bipolar, they have it more. And again, coming from the spectrum perspective, I know that autistic people all have trouble with time, because one of the things they do is they focus when they're into something, they focus on it. Time is not an element. They focus so well that they absolutely can ignore time. And that's why it's so hard to get some kids off of video games,
Electronics. Yep.
because they're so immersed, so focused, so engaged, they have no perception of time. So that when you tell them 15 minutes, that means nothing. Absolutely. They're just totally engaged in what it is that they're doing. Again, this is such an important element, is that everybody has had this phenomenon, but people that are more visual, spatial, and definitely people on the spectrum, it's more obvious, more blatant, and they really have trouble with time. So many of the kids I work with who are in school, what happens is they've been in school for 7 or 8 hours. It's torture. It's some of it's fun, but most of it isn't. Homework. You say
Oh
to them,
yeah.
20 minutes of homework. You can do this. For a kid that I work with, for them, that's an eternity. It doesn't mean anything. They live more in the moment, and they tend to focus in the moment, and they don't perceive time in a linear fashion.
That it's, earlier you had kind of just, you said something that hit it on the nose. For me, when you're doing something that you enjoy, time soars. It just it moves so fast. And one of the first times I actually really understood that I was having issues with time was when I was depressed. And during those super deep downs, time would just slow to a crawl. And of course, the entire time you're in that state, all you want is out of it. But at the same time, you're also perceiving like, okay, every moment is lasting longer. And it at least for me, it amplified the down
Sure.
because I knew I was trapped. And, I think, and the reason I feel like time is such a important aspect for mental health experts to analyze and ask and talk about is that we have all these things written in the DSM-4, and as we talk about diagnosing and stuff like that, please listen. Of course, at the beginning of the show we have a disclaimer, but jumping back on the subject, when we have like specific, okay, they have to have this kind of a swing for this amount of time, or they have to be sad for this long, we kind of branch out and give specifications for a specific diagnosis. But one thing that's never in there is, how do they perceive time? Are they constantly rushed? Do they feel like time doesn't matter? So somebody, I mean, with anxiety, I mean, I can use my dad as a perfect example. That man has no concept of time, and he is just happy, which, I mean, I envy that, because for me, if I have a project, it's all based in like, oh, I don't have enough time. And there's always that perception I don't have enough, which is really you know, I think a lot of people could relate if they don't have enough food or enough money or enough vacation time, or, if you're not feeling well, if you don't have enough health. We all understand what that feels like. But if you feel like it all of the time, that just causes that anxiety, panic, depression, sadness. And I don't think I speak for just myself. I know there's a lot of individuals out there, and definitely with ADHD. I mean, you mentioned video games, and autism, ADHD just instantaneously popped into my head in terms of, when you're in that moment and doing something you enjoy and you're passionate about, there is no concept of time. I mean, I remember I could be gone for 8 hours, you know, just playing basketball. That was one thing I never even knew. The sun would go down, and I'd be like, oh my goodness, I better go get some food. So I thought you did a very beautiful job explaining. One, you definitely picked up exactly what I was talking about. And for me, it's just the importance of that as a variable, because I know a lot of individuals that, especially when we talk about how prevalent anxiety is, our whole society is based upon, okay, you need to get this and this and this and this done. Everything's deadlines, everything's time based, because our company structures are built in a sequential linear fashion, just like our school systems. So, and I think I'm seeing more and more people coming out that are more creative. And we've talked about that before. Do you think that the society that we're going into is, uh, you know, built even for people to, are we going to see more division between that? Is time going to become something that's irrelevant because we have online, we have remote work? So will that bring down? So these are some hypothetical questions I'm asking you. What do you think, Jeffrey?
Well, when I can look at it a couple different ways. To me, and to a lot of experts as well, other experts, they see the world being more specialized and more localized, and there's going to be a big need for people who really know their field. And that's the person that's kind of on the spectrum, or someone who's nearly on the spectrum. And I also see those people being produced either genetically or because of their environment, who are more visual, more into they become specialists, they immerse themselves in stuff. And progress, I mean, there's been a big movement, mostly 10, 15 years ago, where innovative companies would give their workers a project, I know that Apple did this, and I think Google did it too. And their comment was, you have till August 16th to get it done. If you finish it before August 16th, then, I mean, you're free. You can do whatever you want. We just want it done. That's kind of the attitude of work hard, immerse yourself, get it done, and then you can play. And it works. It works really, really well. These companies are amongst the most successful for lots of reasons. But one of the reasons is that they kind of just throw it out there, get it done by a certain amount of time, and you do it intensely. And the reward is you get to play. A kid I know that I work with won an Apple scholarship, and he went out to San Francisco for the Apple conference. And he noticed he was there on a Friday, and no one was in the office. No one appeared to be working at the headquarters. And he asked, and he said, "Well, the people have all finished their projects, and they're out having fun, and they get paid like tremendously well." Now that model seemed to work. I don't see it so much anymore. Because of hard times economically, because of scarcities. Most work environments, very unfortunately, are more productivity in a certain amount of time. Get it done by noon if it's 9, and a lot of pressure put on employees. And I do believe that this is one of the reasons we have quiet quitting and overt quitting. People are being forced to produce quickly, and they're not being treated real well. They're treated as objects, and they just hate their jobs. And one of the reasons is that the workers have a perception of time which doesn't equal the common old time work environment, which was like I guess, a conveyor belt. That's the worst possible work environment: low pay, boring work, no real rewards, but you got to produce in a short period of time. If you don't, you're gone. We're going back to that a little bit, and it's not a good trend. I do believe that ultimately it'll be like Apple and Google, where workers will just be given something to do, given some kind of work project, and then they're told it needs to be done by the end of the month, and they get to work on it. They can, the emphasis is on getting it done quickly and finishing the project, checking it out carefully, because if someone notices that it's not a good product, you have to come back and work some more, and then enjoy the money, having fun, out playing, going on trips. So the workers feel like they're appreciated, and they have a reason to go to work besides a paycheck. And that's probably the future. But so many things get in the way of that. And nothing is, as you stated before, there's no real perception in this culture that how differently different people perceive time.
That's really well stated. It's interesting, when you talk about kind of where you see people going, just in the work environment, and the quiet quitting, and the misunderstanding of some of, our world is so connected. And I think in a lot of ways, some people that would have never joined the workforce have to,
Right.
and they all have to work together. And in the past, before even internet was spotty and stuff like that, you couldn't do remote. Now everything's so interconnected and speed based. I have noticed that when I work with individuals, if I focus on more goal oriented learning, instead of, okay, so, or improvement, right? If somebody wants to work on their body, if somebody wants to work on their diet, it doesn't matter what it is. When time is a factor, it it causes stress, it causes more anxiety when the goal is focused upon. So, okay, our goal is for, let's say, our body, for example, So we want to not lose weight. Same thing with that, actually. That's a different topic, but so you want to get to a certain shape or fit into a specific kind of suit. Maybe my belly's a little too big. I want this suit jacket to fit. If that goal is focused upon and you remove the time constraint, the goal is typically easier to accomplish, but it typically lasts. I've found that a lot of times when time is a factor, not only does it cause stress, but when people accomplish it, they kind of recoil from it. It's like a rebound. So I mean, there's just a lot of factors with time that are not discussed, and especially in a setting where a lot of times it would have been very nice for me to have a therapist sit across from me and say, "Listen, it's obvious that you're trying to accomplish what's not possible in a week. There are certain things and pressures that I put on myself, that are daily and constant, and they're almost always time based. And patience is very difficult for me, especially when I see where I want to go. It's like I want to be there instantly. And I think some of that comes with the gap in the way I think. And you'd mentioned that earlier when you were talking about people on the spectrum kind of thinking in a non-linear fashion. And I feel like I do that even with goals. Like I
You
don't
do.
understand. Yeah, I just jump into that because I know, like, for my niece, you mentioned a couple things and I can kind of see little bits in, like, what you had described about even how she functions with time. She just has gaps sometimes. So you had mentioned kind of about how, if you get into it, what would be some things that you found useful or suggestions for? I know individuals deal with this. Parents sometimes have a child that's always stressed out about being either late or, feeling rushed. What are some things that you found to be helpful for either individuals or families or partners, whatever the case might be?
Well, use technology. Use your phone. Everyone's got a phone. Use your phones. Set alarms so you don't have to worry about it. You're still not going to deal with it well, but you'll at least know when you have to be moving out of something and into something else. That's the most perfect way to do it. And a thought that I had that was important was, why do we give people extended time on tests who have proven that they have some kind of, I hate this word, learning disability? We do it because we're kind of admitting that time is perceived differently by these people. Now, considering that everybody who is labeled learning disabled, almost all of them have the same disability. It's trouble turning their pictures and thoughts into the right words, reading because it happens too fast and the words can look differently on a page. But we admit implicitly, not overtly, but implicitly, that these people need more time to show what they can produce. Now, if we do that for someone who's got the diagnosis of learning disabled, but I don't think we realize just how extensive this is. And we're living in a time where we have less linear sequential people and we have more visual, spatial, right brained people. And for right brain visual people, time is perceived differently. That's the point of this
Yeah.
podcast, is that these people it's just not the same. Because if you look at the concept of time, it is perfectly harmonious with the way left brain people think. It is absolutely in congruence with the way neurotypical people process. But because we have so many less neurotypical people now, more and more people need extended time on tests. And those time tests are disappearing in schools too. It's so many parents and so many kids that are very bright just can't speed it up. They have a different perception of time. They they might overthink stuff. They might look at it from different angles. But whatever it is, there is a movement away from time tests, ritual, rote kinds of learning. And that's because there's a tacit admission amongst the experts that some people perceive time differently. It should be for everybody. You
I
take
agree.
time out of the equation in schools and work. You give a deadline that's pretty broad, and then you incentivize getting stuff done early. What's a better incentive than you achieve this project and
And play.
you're free to enjoy your life? I mean, people will love going to work at that point. It's all performance based. Of course, there'll be some people who will take advantage and not do shoddy work just to get it done, but they'll get caught and they'll get fired, or
Eventually it catches up. Yeah.
yeah. So the kind of person that is emerging, the kind of brains that are emerging, both in school and in work, are more visual, spatial, less time, I guess, less time based and more result oriented. And this type of a brain sees everything. The autistic people that I work with, none of them are low functioning. They're middle and high functioning, but they're natural born experts and they seek out truth and something that's really interesting to them, and they can get lost in that. They can get a tremendous knowledge in that narrow area of interest,
The
but they
depth.
don't finish the project right at a time. But yet they can get so much more out of learning their way. An interesting sidelight is that schools for gifted and talented kids virtually all eliminate time. They demand productivity, but they tend to do stuff that's interesting, and they allow more time for the person to really get into the depth of it, and they work. But I think it's not just the gifted and talented, however you define that, who are this way now. I think more and more people are this way now. So that concept of a regimented work schedule or school schedule will disappear, but it'll take a while, and there will be a whole lot of casualties. People who give up, or just hate work and
Oh
just
yeah.
see it as torture and don't feel productive or appreciated. And one of the many reasons, and it's far from just time, but one of the many reasons is time perception. It's something that is low on the recognition scale by most people, but it's important and eventually will emerge.
You know, I have had some wonderful, psychiatrists and psychologists that, I worked with. I never had anyone ever address time with me. No one ever said, especially with, if you think of, I took the MMPI test, all of the other ones for written ones, but just besides those questions, the ones that I was asked, very commonly, how do you feel? Are you sad? Do you feel like you fit in? Those are all great questions. But so often, and especially with, anxiety, panic attack, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, and definitely even for bipolar, one of the things that I tried to explain, somebody asked like, well, what does mania feel like? Because of course, some of the symptoms people are familiar with is talking too fast or
Right.
your mind skipping and jumping. For me, um, actually, to start this, one of the most common things that I remember being asked was, do you drive too fast? So driving too fast is really common. For me, when I was manic, I would be going, way over the speed limit. There were a lot of times where I was driving at a dangerous speed. And to me, it was not that I was driving fast. And it just felt like the whole world was so slow. I
Yeah.
was so impatient with people. Like, why don't they get it? So I would get frustrated with people. And so my perception of time did change with every single one of the things I deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that was never asked, and it's never talked about. It's not focused about by mental health experts. And it's something that I think is so vital, and especially for parents. If you have a child that's freaking out about school or freaking out about a project, well, are they concerned about getting it done in time? What about getting up in the morning? I mean, or oftentimes, like my, um, you know, using for myself for an example, if I need to be somewhere by a specific time, it just, the entire day and every activity is shaped by that single event.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And that is such a pain. I don't like that. And then I look at some people that are neurotypical, and they just are flowing through life. And a lot of times it's so, it brings me to a sense of envy, because I wish so much that I could let go. And there are times where it's so frustrating. And so it's, this is one of those topics that I've just been, I've wondered why it's not in literature, why it's not studied. And then if you look at specific drugs, so I was flipping through this nursing book that I found, and when I opened it up, they were talking about narcotics, and one of them that they had talked about was marijuana. And um, the very first thing I read was, most people in the studies have said that it felt like it slowed time, right? And
Right.
most people that have had alcohol have felt what it feels like when they forget the night flies by. It's like almost the exact opposite.
Well, they're called
And
mind altering drugs, and one of the things that they alter is the perception of time.
exactly. And so I'm going, why isn't this looked at for a medication? If you could slow someone's perception of time, imagine how nice that would be for people with anxiety, because
Yeah,
you're of course moving at the same speed, but your day would feel a little bit longer. It would just stretch things out. I'm going, that'd be a great medication.
I
Um,
just thought of something. You had asked me to give some examples of things that help, and I answered it, but then I dove off a little bit. A good way and I've done this with a lot of the kids I work with educationally. Um, I'll say we're going to do this for 20 minutes, and I put a large clock in front of them, and I'll use just a regular old clock, analog clock, and say it's 5:10. When that big hand gets to 5:20 on the 4, you're done. So they're free to look up and check in how they're progressing, and then it tends to give them some kind of frame to deal with your perception of time. And they also get the implicit suggestion that, yeah, it doesn't last forever. Because what happens over and over and over again with all kids, but especially non-neurotypical kids, is they tend to live in the moment. And when you live in the moment, you just perceive that's your reality. You don't naturally look ahead because that's sequential thinking. You live in the moment, and you just perceive it as this is the way it's going to be for the next 600 years or however long it is that I'm living. Um, but if you make it finite, if you give them something like the big hand's on the 5, when the big hand moves to the 4, you're done. That works great. Or just tell them intermittently how much more time they have. And I like the idea of homework, which is, God, is it torture for most kids.
for me,
No,
yeah.
I'll say to them, do what you can until it's 5:05 again. When that big hand hits the 4, whatever you've done, you turn in. And then I tell the teacher, of them is I tell parents to tell the teacher, it worked. We got most of it done. Mission accomplished. Please don't penalize my kid because they didn't do every problem. Most teachers will go with that because so many kids don't. I mean, homework is dying off in frequency because people just don't do it because it's too much pressure. parents who try to enforce homework rules fight with their kids all the time and end up having a miserable time with their kid, and then tends to ruin the relationship. The goal shouldn't be to make it you finish something no matter how long it takes. Put parameters on it that are perceived of by the child, realizing that all of a sudden what's happening is they know when it starts and when it finishes. You tell them to go as hard as they can, but it's possible because now it's finite. And it's all about when you're miserable and doing something awful, and you tend to not perceive time like other people do. You wallow in it because you literally think it's going to go on forever. But if you put a seeable, observable go end game up there, and the kid can sort of check in every once in a while, it works. It just works better. And homework will soon, I think, be a thing of the past. It is in a lot of schools. They don't even do it anymore. I mean, they've given up. They've been told by parents that it's hopeless. So what they'll do is they'll say to the kid and allow time. If you can finish this in class, you don't have it as homework. And that works really well. And teachers don't like to deal with it either. So it's dying. And it's kind of a tacit admission that, yeah, these kids have issues with time. They go home and all they want to do is relax, play video games, another subject for another time, and play with their friends or go outside. And they can't because they're doing the same thing they've done for 6 hours or 7 hours in school. And again, the key component, the key sentence of what I said is if you make it finite and they can literally see when they're done, they're more likely to do it. So it's an admission that time is not something that most kids deal with well. So you make it easier for them.
There were 2 points that you said there that I really loved. One, that feeling of it being forever. The other really interesting thing is that living in the moment. It's really interesting because I've always been envious of people who live in the moment, right? In terms of the way it's talked about in society, right? So if you're living in the moment, you're enjoying the moment, you're breathing in, you're focused on your breath, right? If you think about it from a meditative state. But I've always envied that. What you just kind of explained kind of blew my mind a little bit because I always do live in the moment. I think what I've been envious of is being able to let go of it and let go of that sense of time. And the other thing is sometimes that moment that I myself, and I know other individuals I've worked with who are not neurotypical, have mentioned this before. A lot of times the moment that you're living in is distant, or it's in the past, or it's somewhere else and you're stuck. And the same feeling of that time being pulled in. Um, for homework, when you mentioned that, I know for me, I always felt like that. I know that a lot. I'm seeing that I've had to work with people differently, and I have to frame everything based on getting more done out of less time. And part of that is because everybody's doing more. But there's a couple other factors at play. And I'm just wondering, as we kind of wrap up this subject, because we could go on. This is such a fun topic, and I just think it's really important for people dealing with whether it's a family member or a new relationship, a friendship, you know, a, a daughter, son, sibling, whatever. It's important to talk about how each other perceives time,
Right.
because
Right.
that causes so many fights between people, because one person is feeling rushed and they're trying, and it's always people being kind to each other and then just misunderstanding. It's like always like that, which is just such a frustrating part of the human condition and our human experience, is that most everyone's trying to be nice to each other, and we get frustrated because we don't understand, and a lot of times we don't at least for me, I never knew how to communicate how I felt. I'm finally learning, but understanding how each other perceives time is really vital for a healthy relationship, and something I'd suggest. And I think that one thing you'd mentioned is how it's becoming more common. So as we close this out, I kind of wanted to know your thoughts on, do you think that we're seeing it become more common because of the same factors, both environmental and genetic, that we're seeing the rise in terms of more people on the spectrum, more people being diagnosed with depression, anxiety? I mean, it's all across the board. Do you think that's because, do you think
Mm,
it's tied?
yeah, I do. It's one of the components of it. Um, the big component with conditions such as autism is the person who's on the spectrum, like pretty heavily on the spectrum. They have exaggerated intense senses. They can't. It's considered to be a filtering problem. It's not. It's a condition of excellence. Actually, they over perceive. They perceive much more than the average human being, and they can't deal with it. It's too much. It's too exhausting. It's too stressful, too painful. So they, by sheer force of will or involuntarily, they shut it down. When you start putting a lot of structure into the environment and things have to be done on time, and it's these people aren't, their natural style is not like that. Now, someone may be listening to this thinking, well, why are so many autistic people absolutely absorbed in time? Because they overcompensate. They're so bad at it naturally that they have to construct a defense mechanism or defense system. And that is to go totally the other way and be obsessed with the concept of time. It's a defense mechanism. It's a way to get through the night, get through the day, get through whatever. And it's damaging. And I guess one of my concluding thoughts would be, if not my concluding thought, would be that there are more non-neurotypical people. It's not that they're being recognized, it's that they're there more. And that's mostly an environmental, it's a reaction to a stressful, pressured environment. So people shut it off, and they're under stress. And one of those things that causes stress is people perceive time differently, and nobody's giving anything but lip service to it. If that needs to be examined, that's what I would say.
Yeah. Well, again, I always deeply appreciate our time together. So we'll close this off, and please, everyone that's listening, if there's something here that sparked your interest, or you want us to kind of follow up on or get more into depth on, please reach out. Jeffrey, thank you so much. And we'll close off today, and thank you to everyone for listening. We appreciate you all very much. Thanks so
I
much.
agree. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to Chaos2Cured Podcast. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with everyone you know. And definitely like, follow, and subscribe. Certainly leave a comment if you'd like. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about the next time. Also, in our show notes, there should be direct links where you can follow us on our social media, as well as reach out to us directly. Thanks again, and have a great day.